Okay, so Trump is back in the White House. Republicans swept both the House and the Senate. And I know a lot of you are thinking, what does this even mean for India? Well, to get to the bottom of all of that, we are doing a deep dive today on a recent video by Dhruv Rathee, all about the election results and their potential impact on India.
Yeah, this election, it really has implications for the entire world,
Yeah,
and especially a country like India with such strong ties to the U.S.
absolutely. And, the Republicans now control both the House and the Senate. That gives them a lot of power to shape policy. So where do you think we'll see that power in action?
Well, one of the big things is going to be judicial appointments, especially to the Supreme Court. With the Senate controlled by Republicans, they'll be able to confirm judges who share their conservative outlook. And that could have a global impact. Think about issues like abortion rights, which are already more restricted since that Supreme Court ruling in 2022.
So are you saying we could see U.S. law kind of shift to reflect the global trend towards stricter abortion laws?
It's definitely a possibility. And these judge appointments, they have long-lasting effects. Their decisions shape legal interpretations for generations to come.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, how much does the political pendulum swing in a place like the U.S., and how does that impact the rest of the world?
It is a really important question. And this election, it really shows just how powerful swing states are. These are the states where the vote is usually super close, and they can really decide who wins the whole thing.
It's wild to think a handful of votes in a couple of specific states can change the course of global politics.
Exactly, which begs the question, how might U.S. foreign policy towards India be shaped by this need to win over swing states? What kind of compromises might be made on the international stage just to secure votes back home?
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the convicted elephant in the room. Donald Trump.
A convicted president.
Right, that hush money case.
Right.
And his conviction on 34 felony counts. That throws a real wrench into things. This is unprecedented. The first time a U.S. president has ever been convicted of a crime. And get this, his sentencing is scheduled for after he takes office. Can you imagine the legal drama that's about to unfold?
It's unheard of.
Yeah.
And it raises serious concerns about stability and the predictability of U.S. policy, which will have a direct impact on India's economic and strategic planning.
And let's not forget, Trump built his entire platform on some very strong and sometimes controversial stances. Immigration, for example, is a topic that directly affects many Indians.
Absolutely. Trump has made it clear he wants to crack down on illegal immigration. We've already seen a rise in deportations. Over 1,100 illegal immigrants sent back to India last year alone, many of whom took the risky donkey route.
And for those who might not know, the donkey route is this dangerous and usually illegal way to enter the U.S. It involves going through multiple countries, and it's incredibly risky for anyone who attempts it.
It's a desperate measure, often driven by limited legal options. And with Trump's stricter policies, we might see even more people forced into these dangerous journeys.
And it's not just about illegal immigration. The H-1B visa program, which a lot of Indian tech workers depend on, has also been a target of Trump's criticism.
He's been very vocal about his belief that it takes jobs away from American workers during his last term. We saw a surge in H-1B visa rejections. It made it much tougher for skilled professionals, especially from India, to work in the U.S.
Just think about the potential impact. In 2023, 72.3% of all approved H-1B visas went to Indians. If that number drops significantly under Trump, it could have a ripple effect on the entire Indian economy and affect countless families.
It's a critical point.
Yeah.
The results of this election
Yeah.
won't just be felt in Washington, D.C. They'll be felt in homes and workplaces across India.
Exactly. And speaking of the economy, let's talk trade. Trump's America First policy could mean tariffs on Indian goods, just like what happened with steel and aluminum during his first term.
Yeah, those tariffs, they really hurt the Indian steel industry. And if Trump expands them to other sectors, it could strain the U.S.-India economic relationship.
Right. It's fascinating how a policy designed to protect American jobs could unintentionally impact the global economy, particularly in places like India.
Yeah, it really highlights the interconnected nature of the global economy. Actions taken in one country can have unintended consequences far beyond its borders.
It makes you wonder what other economic surprises might be in store under Trump.
One thing that comes to mind is a potential shift back toward protectionism, which could really hurt bilateral trade between the U.S. and India during the previous administration. There's significant growth in that trade relationship. Many of Trump's tariffs were rolled back, which resulted in a much more favorable trade balance for India.
So this could become a point of contention then, depending on how Trump decides to handle trade this time around.
Exactly. And this brings us to another major issue with global implications: climate change. Trump's past actions and rhetoric suggest that he'll likely continue to downplay the issue. And that could have far-reaching consequences, not only for the U.S., but also for countries like India, who are already feeling the worst effects of climate change.
That's true. It's easy to forget that the U.S. is one of the biggest contributors to global emissions, and its policies have a ripple effect on the entire world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
During his first term, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which was a landmark international effort to fight global warming. And he's suggested he might do the same thing again. He's also talked about deregulating oil and gas production, which would lead to even more greenhouse gas emissions.
This is a stark contrast to Kamala Harris, who initially campaigned on a platform of strong climate action. She even expressed support for the Green New Deal.
It's true. Harris initially presented herself as a champion for the climate. But since then, she's kind of softened her stance, backing away from some of those more aggressive proposals.
So it seems like both candidates have faced criticism for their changing positions on climate change. It makes you wonder, who's really committed to protecting the planet?
It's a valid question. Climate change is such a complex issue. It demands global cooperation and a long-term vision. The U.S., being a global leader, has a responsibility to lead the charge on this.
Yeah.
But it remains to be seen if that will happen under Trump presidency.
And this has a direct impact on India, a country already experiencing the very real effects of climate change. From intense heat waves to unpredictable monsoons, the choices made by the U.S. administration will undoubtedly have consequences for India's efforts to mitigate and adapt to these changes.
Precisely. It underscores the interconnectedness of global challenges. Climate change doesn't care about borders, and finding solutions requires international collaboration.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from the complexities of the U.S. election system and the unprecedented situation of a convicted president to the potential impact on India in terms of immigration, trade, and even climate change. It's clear that this election has major consequences that reach far beyond U.S. borders.
Yeah, and it's not just about policy decisions. It's about the broader trends that this election reflects. The rise of populism, the growing divide between political parties, and the erosion of trust in institutions. These are challenges that democracies all over the world are struggling with.
So the U.S. election, it's like a microcosm of the global political landscape, reflecting the anxieties and tensions of our times.
Exactly. Understanding the dynamics at play in the U.S. can offer valuable insights into the challenges facing democracies worldwide.
We've talked about the potential impact on India, but now it's time to broaden our perspective. What does this election mean for the future of democracy itself, for the balance of global power, and for the world as we know it?
Those are the million-dollar questions, and we'll explore them in our final segment.
Yeah, it really highlights how interconnected the global economy is. Actions in one place can have consequences everywhere. I wonder what other economic surprises we might see under Trump.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is a possible shift back towards protectionism, that could really impact trade between the U.S. and India. Remember, during the previous administration, that trade relationship grew significantly.
Yeah.
Many of Trump's tariffs were actually rolled back, and it led to a much better trade balance for India.
So are you saying this could be a source of conflict, depending on how Trump approaches trade this time?
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial issue with global implications: climate change. Trump's actions and words in the past suggest he might continue to downplay this issue, and that could have huge consequences, not only for the U.S., but for countries like India, which are already facing the brunt of climate change.
Right. We can't forget the U.S. is a major contributor to global emissions, and their policies have a ripple effect.
Absolutely. During his first term, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Remember, that was a landmark international effort to combat global warming. And he's hinted he might do it again. He's also talked about deregulating oil and gas production, which would just increase greenhouse gas emissions.
That's a huge contrast to his opponent, Kamala Harris, who initially campaigned on strong climate action. She even voiced support for the Green New Deal.
Yeah, it's true. Harris did present herself as a climate advocate, but she's since softened her stance. She's stepped back from some of those more aggressive proposals.
So it seems like both candidates have faced criticism for their shifting positions on climate change. It makes you think, who really has the planet's best interests at heart?
It's a valid question. Climate change is a complicated issue. It requires global cooperation and a long-term vision. The U.S., being a global leader, has a responsibility to be at the forefront of this fight. But we'll have to wait and see if that happens under Trump.
And this directly affects India. They're already experiencing the effects of climate change, from those intense heat waves to the unpredictable monsoons. The decisions made by the U.S. administration will absolutely have consequences for India as they try to adapt to these changes.
Absolutely. It highlights how interconnected these global challenges are. Climate change doesn't respect borders, and finding solutions requires international collaboration.
So we've talked about a lot, from the intricacies of the U.S. election system and the unprecedented situation of having a convicted president, to the impact on India, immigration, trade, and even climate change. It's clear this election has consequences that go far beyond America.
Right. And it's not just about policy. It's about the bigger trends this election shows us. The rise of populism, the growing divide between political parties, and people losing trust in institutions. These are challenges for democracies all over the world.
So the U.S. election, it's like a snapshot of the global political landscape, reflecting the anxieties and tensions of our time.
Exactly. By understanding what's happening in the U.S., we can gain valuable insights into the challenges that democracies around the world are facing.
We've focused on the implications for India, but now let's zoom out. What does this election mean for the future of democracy, for the balance of power globally, and for the world as we know it?
Those are the big questions.
Yeah.
And we're going to explore them in our final segment.
So we've talked about how this U.S. election could impact India. But now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What does all of this mean for the future of democracy worldwide?
This election really feels like a turning point. You know, it's not just about who's president. It's about the very idea of democracy itself.
Right. The U.S. has always been seen as this model of democracy, but lately, things haven't been looking so good.
Think about it. We have a convicted president, a deeply divided country, and rising political polarization. These are problems that a lot of democracies around the world are facing.
What does this mean for the future of democracy globally? Are we witnessing a decline?
It's hard to say for sure, but there are definitely warning signs. If the U.S., with its long history of democratic institutions, is struggling like this, what does that say for newer, more fragile democracies?
Like a domino effect. If one falls, the others might follow?
That's a real possibility. We could see a rise in authoritarianism, a weakening of democratic norms, and less cooperation on a global scale.
And what about the global balance of power? How might this election affect that?
Well, Trump's America First policy suggests he might take a more isolationist approach. He's been critical of international institutions, and that could create a vacuum that other powerful countries, like China or Russia, might try to fill.
So we could be moving toward a world that's more fragmented and unpredictable, with potential conflicts emerging as the U.S. steps back from its traditional leadership role.
Exactly. And that raises the stakes even higher. In a world facing complex challenges like climate change, pandemics, and economic instability, we need strong global cooperation more than ever, not isolationism.
Honestly, it all feels a bit overwhelming. What can we even do as individuals when faced with such massive global shifts?
Well, the first step is awareness. Stay informed, engage in thoughtful conversations, and challenge your own assumptions. Don't let yourself be swayed by oversimplified narratives or partisan rhetoric.
So it's all about critical thinking, questioning everything, and seeking out diverse viewpoints.
Absolutely. And never underestimate the power of your own voice. Get involved in your community. Support organizations working for positive change. And speak up for the world you want to see.
Because ultimately, the future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make, both individually and together.
This deep dive has hopefully equipped you, not only to understand the news, but also to think critically about it and to engage with the world in a more informed and impactful way.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the specific implications for India to the wider global trends highlighted by this U.S. election. It's a complex and ever-changing landscape, but by staying informed, engaged, and hopeful, we can navigate these challenges and work towards a better future.
The future is unwritten, and it's up to all of us to shape it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for a better world.